Hi, my name is Juliet Selgren, and this is my podcast, The Great Antidote. This podcast has been brought to you by the Center for Growth and Opportunity at Utah State University. To learn more, visit www.thecgo.org. It's my pleasure to have Chris Edwards on today. Chris is the Director of Tax Policy Studies at Cato and the editor of downsizinggovernment.org. He is a top expert on federal and state tax and budget issues. Today, I want to talk to him about his work on wealth inequality. I have to say that this is our second take of this interview. I interviewed him a few weeks ago at the beginning of quarantine, and we were losing power a good amount. We lost power during the interview, and when it came back on, the recording wasn't working well. Big chunks of the interview were lost. So now we're recording it again. It'll be a little bit different. Thank you, Chris, for being so generous with your time and retaping this for me.
Absolutely, Juliet. You know, all the great entrepreneurs in history, they didn't get it right the first time. It was all trial and error. You know, whether it was Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or all the other great entrepreneurs, they try stuff that didn't work, and then they have to try again. But then the second time, things will work great. So you got to keep trying.
So, I ask all my guests this one question before we jump into what we're talking about today. What is the most important thing that people my age or people in my generation should know that we don't?
Well, the first one is that America is the land of opportunity, despite the fact that we're in a coronavirus crisis and recession now, which is horrible for many millions of Americans. We will get out of this. And things, there are blue skies ahead. And America is a land of opportunity, meaning young people more than ever can choose what they want to do in life and they can have fulfilling relationships and a fulfilling career. There's more opportunities than ever. The other thing I would say is that the crisis should remind everyone that you never know what's going to happen in the future, and so you should save. You should, when you earn money, you should put some of it in the bank, put some of it in the stock market. You should save because you never know when you're going to be unemployed or when your business is going to get into trouble. Americans should save more, and this is a reminder of that.
I think that's very, very good advice. Okay, so now kind of setting the stage for discussion. Um, I want to ask you, what's the difference between income inequality and wealth inequality? We hear a lot about both issues, but my listeners may not know the difference between the two.
Right. Income and wealth are very different things. So, I'll give you a real world example. Let's say you had a young lawyer and she's just graduated from law school, and law school costs a lot and she's deep into debt. So if you looked at her sort of on the statistics, she would be very poor. She doesn't Not only doesn't she have any money, she's like negative, because she owes a lot in student loans. So she would be very poor on the statistics, and yet nobody would feel bad for that person because they just earned a law degree, and she will probably earn a lot of income later in her life. On the other hand, someone who would appear richer than her would be, say, someone who was, say, a garbage man their whole life, but he was prudent and he put money aside and he saved. So by the time he retired, he had quite a lot of assets or savings or wealth. So he would appear quite wealthy. So I guess my point is that behind these statistics about how rich and poor Americans are, there you have to really look at people's individual situations. Some people that may appear poor, actually, it's just because they're young. A lot of young people are poor just because simply they haven't had a chance to earn money and save yet. So that's one thing to think about.
I'm surprised by the intense amount of attention that income inequality gets compared to the opportunity that there is for lots of lower income Americans to become wealthier or, as you said, young people to get wealthier over the course of their lifetime, which is called income mobility, but also for every income class to grow over the course of time. What am I missing?
No, I think you're absolutely right, Juliet. You know, people, the news is always full of stories about rich people like Bill Gates maybe buying big mansions and the like. But all these people started off with a lot less money. Some very wealthy people started off very poor, and just through hard work and perseverance and trial and error, as we discussed, they came upon a great idea, and they pursued it, and they became very rich. I mean, the richest person in America today is Jeff Bezos, who owns about 15% of Amazon. Well, Amazon didn't just happen. Jeff Bezos started Amazon literally in his garage in 1994. No one knew that it would work. He tried to get some people to invest in his company early on. They were very skeptical. And when you read about the start of a lot of these companies that have become very successful, and the owners wealthy now, when they started out, people were very skeptical. So a lot of people end up becoming rich who originally they were very gutsy. They took these big risks that other people didn't want to take. So I would come back to this idea that, America is a land of opportunity. To get rich, though, you got to take risks, you got to work hard, and if you're lucky, you will be successful.
So, politicians like AOC often say that we need to fix income inequality, we need to reduce it. And her solution is that we have to use a 70% marginal rate on tax rate on income. Can you talk a little about what this problem with this solution would be?
So there's a couple of problems. I mean, one is that America's greatest concentration of wealth is in Silicon Valley, California, near San Francisco. For decades now, that is where the great majority of all these awesome products like smartphones and all these other things we use today have come from. How that happened was sort of like an avalanche of wealth. People starting in the 50s with companies like Hewlett Packard and others, and Intel Corporation, the people who founded those companies became rich. Then they took their money and they invested in new startup companies. And then the new startup companies, some of them were successful, and then the owners got rich, and then they reinvested their money. So the money, when if the money is left in the private sector like that, it sort of compounds, and then the rich people invest in new risky startup companies, and the in the end, so over time, if the government stays out and the taxes aren't too heavy, then new we get many new products and new innovations and new technologies that benefit everybody. So I think the main argument for the government not taxing people excessively is that wealth, when it's left in the hands of the entrepreneurs who created it, go on to use the money to invent great new things. And those things, those great new inventions, benefit everyone. By the way, you can see a similar thing. There's a similar thing has gone on with America's pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies. If we get a breakthrough product for the coronavirus, it probably will come from one of these many startup biotechnology companies here in America that wealthy people started and founded, have invested in. So you put too much taxes on these companies, we're not going to get all the breakthroughs that benefit everybody.
So now let's talk about wealth inequality. It has been a very important topic of conversation during the Democratic nomination race for the presidency. Both Senator Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have talked about wealth tax proposals to address this wealth inequality. Both of them have denounced billionaires as a problem of our system. For instance, yesterday Bernie Sanders complained that, quote, this system of unfettered greed is morally obscene. It's time to put working families first, not billionaires, end quote. Listening to them, you would think that everyone who's ultra wealthy is sitting on a pile of gold that they're keeping in a vault at their house or something, and that they didn't have to work for it because it came to them through an inheritance or by luck. What is the biggest misconception about wealth, and its creation?
Well, the first thing I would say, I think comments like Bernie Sanders' comment there are frankly disgusting and disgraceful. The fact that Sanders himself didn't seem to do much with his own life until he was around 40 years old, and then he's basically lived off the taxpayer as a politician his whole life. He has never created any jobs. He's never created any great American companies. He hasn't really added to the nation's GDP or income really at all. All he does is complain about wealthy people. Those wealthy people have created America's wealth and provide jobs for all of us. So I think that those sorts of comments by Sanders are really kind of disgraceful. In America, we have some data on how the richest Americans got rich. 70% of them, the richest Americans, it is self made wealth. As we were talking about, there are entrepreneurs like Jeff Bezos who started often in the middle class, and they had great ideas and they worked hard and they became rich. And indeed, the share of the rich people in America that got rich not from inherited money, but from self-made wealth has increased greatly over the decades. We were talking about Silicon Valley. That is a perfect example of where so many young people have gone out there. They've worked hard. They've had good ideas, and they've become wealthy by creating products that we all enjoy. That is how most wealth in America is made. So that said, Sanders and AOC and some other critics on the left make a good point when they complain about wealthy people who have got wealthy by sucking off of government special benefits, by corruption, by cronyism, and that sort of stuff. And so I agree that with them that we should not hand out special benefits to wealthy people, to Wall Street, and insiders like that. You can see those some of these patterns around the world. Some of the most corrupt countries in the world, like Egypt, like Russia, like Ukraine, they have very high levels of wealth inequality, and they have that high inequality because they are so corrupt. The people who get rich in places like Russia mainly get rich because they suck up to the government. They're friends of Vladimir Putin. I am against all that kind of stuff, and so I'm against that corruption and cronyism, and we should try to root it out in this country and get rid of it as well. So I'm for wealth when it is made through the market in fair competition, but I would agree with Saunders and AOC that I'm against the wealth created by cronyism.
And we'll talk about cronyism a little bit more later, but I really think that does make sense. It's not good to live off of the government, to get rich and wealthy off of stuff you get from the government, because that's not the purpose of the government. So in your paper with Ryan Bourne at Cato, you write that, quote, Forbes has published an annual list of the 400 Americans with the highest net worth since 1982. By our count, just 21 from 1982 were still on the list in 2019. Where have the others gone? Numerous people have died and their wealth divided among heirs. The wealth of many others has stagnated or declined because of income taxes, consumption, charitable giving, or poor investment choices. So, is there a lot of wealth? So, there is a lot of wealth mobility, but it goes up and down. But has wealth inequality increased?
So that's a very complicated question. Here's the thing: we don't know exactly, how much wealth there is in America and who has it because the government doesn't really have good data. We have good data on incomes, and the reason is because everyone files a tax return every year to the government that records your income. Wealth, we don't have very good data. We there are surveys of people to find out how much wealth they have, but there's a lot of dispute about whether wealth inequality has actually risen or fallen over the years. We do know about some of the wealth of the richest people. You mentioned Forbes magazine. Since around 1980, Forbes magazine has guessed at or estimated who the richest 400 Americans are. and how they got their money. And so, what we find out from that list is that the share of people who have on that, the richest Americans who have had self-made wealth, mainly high-tech billionaires, the share that has have self-made wealth has increased, while the people who have inherited wealth has declined. So everyone, I think, generally thinks that's a good thing, that wealth is dynamic like that. That we want new people becoming wealthy through the market and inventing great products. It is a bit of a different thing in Europe. Your mom grew up, Juliet, in France, and Juliet in France is traditionally, they've had more people who have had inherited wealth, and it's the same families over many generations that hold on to the wealth. America has been different, thankfully, in that we've had more of a free market economy, and there's been more sort of turnover in the number of who the wealthy people are. So every year in America, there's new people creating new products that benefit everyone, and then there's turnover in who the wealthiest people are. And here's something I think that's been very important about America. All the way back a century, the richest Americans have been those people who have created these great products that have helped low income and middle class people the most. There are lots of famous examples. Henry Ford, the founder of Ford Motor Company a century ago, he became one of the richest people in America by pushing down the price of automobiles so that everyone can afford an automobile. Automobiles were originally just thing that rich people had. And more recently, Walmart, the massive big department store that has some of the lowest prices that benefit low income and middle income people the most, that was founded by this guy Sam Walton, who became the richest person in America. So I'm all in favor. I think this is a fantastic thing about America, that you get some of the richest people get rich by slashing prices that help low and middle income people the most.
Can you tell us what the main problems are with a wealth tax? For instance, it seems like some of it would be hard to value and some of it could be easy to hide. Can you tell us what impact a wealth tax would have on the economy and on workers?
So what we have in America now, we already have a bunch of different taxes. We have an income tax that the government takes a slice of how much income everyone earns every year. We have sales taxes when you buy products. People who own homes pay property taxes. So the unfortunate so we've already got enough taxes, in my point of view. But unfortunately, some people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and some other politicians on the political left, they want to add a whole new tax on in America, which would basically be for wealthy people. It would tell people like Bill Gates, so add up all your wealth and give us like 2% of it a year or 4% of it, every single year. So we've never had a tax like that before. A lot of European countries used to have those taxes, but they've almost all been repealed now because they were so damaging and destructive. So let's go back to the richest man in America is Jeff Bezos. He has wealth of about $100 billion, but virtually all that wealth comes from his ownership of Amazon, and so his wealth in Amazon keeps hundreds of thousands of Americans employed, doing this great service for all of us, delivering all these packages. So if you imposed a wealth tax on him, it would take away. It would Amazon would have to shrink and downsize in order for Bezos to pay this tax. So that would hurt all of us. What good would it be if the government imposed this tax that damaged companies and prevented them from doing the investments that make us all better off? So that's why wealth taxes are damaging. They damage business and business activities that benefit all of us.
But many people worry that wealthy people have too much influence on the political system and that they can have more influence than any common people. It seems kind of like it could be a legitimate worry. After all, I can imagine that Bill Gates or Charles Koch have more access to politicians or the president even than me or any of my friends. Could that undermine democracy? And if it could, would a wealth tax be able to fix that? or address that issue?
Well, there is a big problem in Washington, as you know, Juliet, and I think anyone who starts to learn about politics starts to understand that some big corporations and rich people and lobby groups have a lot of influence in Washington and get special favors. The main way to solve that problem is to shrink Washington and not have it hand out so many favors to begin with. So that's sort of the first solution. Uh, but it is also true that actually rich people often don't have as much influence as you think. So, for example, during the Democratic nomination for the White House this year, where it looks like Joe Biden will probably be the nominee for the Democratic Party, by far the biggest spender was the former mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg, who spent hundreds of millions of dollars, literally, in buying TV advertising, trying to get himself nominated for the Democratic Party, and he completely failed. I think a lot of times what happens is that wealth backfires. People are suspicious of wealthy people when they try to buy their way into getting nominated in political campaigns, and they reject it. And we've seen this many times in the past where the people who have the most money aren't the ones that get nominated. So the last presidential election, Hillary Clinton spent far more than Donald Trump in the campaign, but Trump got elected. And like I said, Michael Bloomberg spent by far more than any other Democratic candidate, but his candidacy went nowhere. So Bernie Sanders didn't have much wealth, and he became one of the most popular folks on the Democratic side. So I think that the influence of wealth can be exaggerated.
So let's go back to the issue of cronyism. You've identified it as an issue related to wealth inequality where there's this unhealthy marriage between corporations and the government, and it in some ways companies can obtain special treatment, subsidies, other favors that they don't usually get because they're politically connected or they can lobby politicians. It kind of seems like corruption. Am I missing something, and how do we fix that?
No, I think you're absolutely right, Juliet. I mean, your mom, Veronique, has written a lot at the Mercatus Center about companies that take subsidies. So she's written a lot about, for example, how Boeing Corporation, the big jetliner manufacturer based in Washington State, for years they've got special handouts from the federal government. I think that's wrong, and it's unfair because it creates an uneven competition between companies. If you have companies should compete on a level sort of playing field to be fair, just like sort of a soccer match where if you have the referee, sort of like the government, favoring one side over another, it creates an unfair competition. And I think it's the same. It's the same with business subsidies that we don't. So we don't. It's unfair to taxpayers to take their money and give it to businesses, but it's also unfair to businesses who don't get the subsidies to have to compete against the businesses that get the subsidies. So the answer here is to eliminate these business subsidy programs altogether, and that is very hard to do. And the Cato Institute and the Mercatus Center, where your mom works, they've spent years arguing for eliminating these subsidies. We've had some success, but man, it's these lobby groups, really get their grips on the politicians in Washington and hold on tightly, and they're really hard to dislodge.
So, um, let's end on a more positive note. In your study, you cited a Cato poll. I read from your paper now, quote, a 2019 Cato YouGov poll found that 62% of Americans surveyed do not believe that, unquote, billionaires are a threat to democracy, end quote. And 69% agree that billionaires, quote, earn their wealth by creating value for others, end quote, end quote. That's good news. Are you optimistic or pessimistic on this issue?
Yeah, I'm optimistic. So at the Cato Institute, we have a scholar, Emily Eakins, who does her own polls, and she hires an expert polling company and she designs the polls, and we get some really interesting results because sometimes the polls you see in newspapers are sort of slanted in certain ways, and they often don't ask the questions that we want to get to. So what she found out is that Americans don't, and this has historically been true too. Americans do not resent wealthy people who they perceive got wealthy in a fair and equitable manner, where they worked hard and they had breakthrough inventions, or they're sports superstars where they competed fairly, or they made their success in music or some other artistic activity. Americans don't resent uh, people who got wealthy on when the playing rules were fair. What they resent is corruption and cronyism. People who broke the rules, who got special favors, and the problem with some of the politicians like Bernie Sanders is they sort of conflate that, and they try to uh, get Americans inflamed about all wealth. Well, that's a really, I think, is a disreputable thing he's doing. Wealth, I think, is generally created in America in markets by entrepreneurs doing great things that benefit all of us. It's really just the small share of wealth that's created by cronyism in America. That's what we all ought to unite against and try to eliminate.
Has the pandemic we're in the middle of affected your view on this at all?
No, the pandemic's really, it's an enormously sad thing for in America. The economy had been doing great, and before the pandemic hit, the statistics on income were looking fantastic. That especially people at the bottom in the strong economy were doing very well. We had the lowest unemployment rate in many decades. People, you can dispute whether or not Donald Trump had anything to do with that. The point, it was mainly markets were benefiting Americans and lifting all Americans up, which was fantastic. Unfortunately, the pandemic and the crisis now has pushed us has pushed 20 million people into unemployment. Poverty will probably be rising. This is very sad and unfortunate, and I hope that governments can put some good policies in place to help the economy grow out of this mess over the next year or two.
Thank you so much, Chris. To my listeners, I really recommend Chris's paper published at Cato with Ryan Bourne. It is packed full of information on wealth inequality, and it asked the hard questions on the issue. Really got me thinking. Thank
Thank
you
you
so
very
much, Chris.
thank you, Juliet. You're doing a great job with your podcast there. You've had some excellent guests, so I hope that your podcast becomes one of the most successful in America. Good luck.
Thank you.